The doorbell chimed at exactly 10 a.m., startling me as I watered my petunias on the back porch of my modest home in Somerville. It was Sunday morning, and the spring sunshine warmed my old bones in a way that only made me grateful for my 65 years. I wasn't expecting visitors this early, but my heart leaped with joy thinking it might be my son Wesley. It had been almost 3 weeks since I'd last seen him, even though he lived just 30 minutes away in one of those fancy gated communities. I dried my hands on the apron I always wore when tending to my garden, smoothed back my silver hair, which I kept in a simple bun, and walked to the front door. When I opened it, there indeed stood my only child with his wife Audrey, both dressed like they were heading to a country club brunch rather than visiting an old woman on a Sunday morning. "Mom, Happy Mother's Day," exclaimed Wesley, embracing me with that restrained strength he always used, as if afraid I might break. "My sweet boy, what a joy to see you," I replied, kissing his cheeks and breathing in that expensive cologne he wore now. So different from the simple soap I'd bathed him with for so many years. Audrey approached with that perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes and gave me a quick peck on each cheek, maintaining a careful distance, as if my age might be contagious. "Happy Mother's Day, Evelyn," she said, extending a bouquet of flowers that surely came from some high-end florist at the mall. I invited them into my humble living room, the same one where I'd raised Wesley, read him bedtime stories, and bandaged his scraped knees after bicycle falls. The furniture was old but well maintained. Every week I polished it with a mixture of olive oil and vinegar, just as my mother had taught me. The lace curtains I'd crocheted myself let in a soft light that illuminated the family photographs arranged on the walls. "Please, sit down. Can I offer you some coffee?" "I baked some banana bread this morning," I said, heading toward the kitchen. "Don't trouble yourself, Mom," Wesley interjected. "Actually, we're here because I wanted to talk to you about something important." I noticed a change in his tone and a quick glance between him and Audrey. My heart raced slightly. In my 65 years of life, I'd learned to recognize when a conversation was about to change my world. "Tell me, son. You know you can talk to me about anything," I responded, settling into my rocking chair, the same one where I'd spent countless nights soothing Wesley when he was a colicky baby. Wesley sat on the main sofa, the one that had belonged to his father before he passed away 10 years ago. Audrey sat beside him, but I noticed she maintained a rigid posture, as if uncomfortable in my simple home. "Mom, I want to make sure you're enjoying the $1,200 monthly allowance I've been sending you. Is that amount comfortable, or do you need more?" His words hit me like a bucket of ice water. $1,200 monthly? I hadn't received a cent from my son in the last 8 months. My teacher's pension barely covered my basic expenses, and I relied on the charity from Pastor Daniel's church to supplement my groceries each week. "What do you mean, son?" I asked, feeling my voice grow weaker. "The $1,200 I send you every month, Mom. Audrey personally brings it on the 10th as we agreed. I want to make sure you're well taken care of." I looked at Audrey, whose face had subtly changed. She was no longer smiling. Her eyes showed something I couldn't quite interpret at that moment, but which I would later recognize as fear. Fear of being discovered. "Wesley," I said slowly, feeling my heart begin to beat faster, "I haven't received any money from you in these months." My son's face transformed immediately, his smile disappeared, and his eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean you haven't received any money?" "Mom, I send you $1,200 every month. Audrey handles delivering it to you personally." My eyes automatically moved toward my daughter-in-law, who had been very still during the entire conversation. Her face was now pale, and I could see small beads of sweat forming on her forehead, despite the pleasant temperature of the morning. "Audrey comes here every month," continued Wesley, looking at his wife. "She tells me you chat, that she gives you the money, and that you're always very appreciative." I felt a knot in my stomach. Audrey did visit me, yes, but not every month. Maybe once every 3 or 4 months, and they were always short, uncomfortable visits where we barely discussed superficial matters. Never ever had she given me any money. "Son, your wife has not given me any money. I live on my pension and with the help of Pastor Daniel's church. Every week I go for the food pantry that the ladies' ministry organizes." The silence that followed was so heavy it was almost tangible. Wesley looked at Audrey with an expression I had never seen before. His eyes had hardened like when he was a child and discovered someone had broken his favorite toy. "Audrey," he said in a dangerously low voice, "what's going on here?" Before she could answer, the doorbell rang again. I stood up, grateful for the interruption, but when I opened the door, I found Sister Grace, a volunteer in her 70s who coordinated the assistance program for needy families at the church. "Good morning, Evelyn. Sorry for the early hour, but I was passing by to drop off this week's groceries and to remind you that tomorrow there's a meeting to organize the church bazaar." Sister Grace entered carrying a grocery bag full of basic products: rice, beans, canned vegetables, some tuna. It was exactly the type of aid that a person without sufficient resources would receive to get by. Wesley looked at the bag, then looked at Sister Grace, then looked at me. His face had changed completely. There were no longer any doubts in his eyes, just a cold fury that reminded me of his father when he discovered a lie. Sister Grace, unaware of the drama unfolding, continued speaking. "Evelyn is always so grateful for the community's help. It's a blessing to be able to support our senior members who live with limited resources." Audrey had frozen beside the sofa, as if her legs had turned to stone. Wesley closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, the fury had been replaced by something worse: complete disappointment. At that moment, I knew something fundamental had changed forever in my family. The truth had come to light, but the price of that truth would be higher than any of us could imagine. What would my son do now? Would he believe me or his wife's lies? And most importantly, what had happened to the money he had supposedly been sending me each month? After Sister Grace left, leaving me with the groceries and an uncomfortable situation, the atmosphere in the living room became so dense that it seemed the air itself weighed more. Wesley stood in the middle of the room, looking alternately at Audrey and me, as if we were pieces of a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Audrey," my son said in a voice I had never heard from him before, a voice that frightened me, "I want you to explain exactly what's happening here." Audrey remained beside the sofa. Her face had lost all color, and I could see small beads of sweat forming on her forehead despite the cool morning. "Wesley, honey, I think your mom is confused. You know how older people can be. Sometimes they forget things." Her voice sounded high-pitched, desperate. Those words hurt me more than any physical blow. Confused? I forget things? Me, who remembered every dollar I spent, every bill I paid, every coin I saved to be able to buy my blood pressure medication. "Audrey," I interrupted, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. "I am not confused. I haven't received a single cent from my son in these 8 months. If I had, I wouldn't be living on church charity. Wesley walked to his expensive leather briefcase and took out his smartphone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, in the way he clenched his jaw. "We're going to resolve this right now," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "Here are all the transfers." He approached me and showed me the screen of his phone. There they were, one after another, 8 transfers of $1,200 each, all directed to an account that, according to him, was mine. "See, Mom? Here's everything. October 10th, November 10th, December 10th. He continued reading the dates. But I couldn't concentrate on his words because something terrible was growing in my chest. "Wesley, son, I don't have that bank account. My only account is the one I opened 20 years ago at the corner bank, and I only have my pension in there." Wesley stopped abruptly, looked at the phone screen, then looked at me, then directed his gaze toward Audrey. She had begun to back toward the door, like a cornered animal looking for an escape. "Audrey?" Wesley's voice was now a dangerous whisper. "Whose bank account is this?" I don't know what you're talking about, honey. There must be some mistake." But Wesley was already dialing a number on his phone. I could vaguely hear the voice of someone on the other end of the line, probably someone from the bank. "Yes, I need to verify the information for an account. Yes, I can provide my identification. It's an account I've been transferring money to." The conversation lasted several minutes. During that time, Audrey and I remained silent, but I could feel her eyes on me. When I finally looked at her, I saw something in her expression that gave me a chill. She no longer looked scared. She looked angry, as if I were to blame for what was happening. Wesley hung up the phone and stood motionless for a moment with his eyes closed. When he opened them, I realized my son had changed forever. "The account is in the name of Audrey Mitchell Harrington," he said in a voice so cold it seemed to come from winter itself. "My wife has been receiving the money I thought I was sending to my mother." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the birds in the garden that normally sang all morning could be heard. It was as if the entire world had stopped to witness this moment. Audrey finally left her position by the sofa and walked to the center of the room, but instead of looking defeated, she stood tall and looked at me with an expression that chilled my blood. "Fine, yes, the money was going to my account, but it's not what you think." Wesley approached her with slow, deliberate steps. "It's not what we think, Audrey. That money was for my mother. Where is it?" "I was saving it for her," she lied blatantly. "I wanted to accumulate a large amount before giving it to her so it would be a nice surprise. I have all the money saved." But I knew that wasn't true. I had seen how Audrey's lifestyle had changed in recent months. The new dresses every time I saw her, the jewelry she didn't have before, the new car she had supposedly bought with savings from her job at the boutique. "Show us that money," said Wesley. "It's at home, in our safe. We can go get it right now." Wesley nodded, but then looked at me. "Mom, do you want to come with us?" Wesley and Audrey's house was in an expensive residential area, full of large homes, with perfect lawns and luxury cars in every driveway. I had always felt uncomfortable there, as if I didn't belong in that world, but today that discomfort was different. Today I was afraid. When we arrived, Audrey led us to Wesley's study, where they had a safe embedded in the wall. With trembling hands, she entered the combination and opened the metal door. Inside were some important documents, some jewelry, and a white envelope. Audrey took the envelope and handed it to Wesley. "Here's all your mom's money. The full Wesley opened the envelope. Inside was money, but when he counted it, his expression darkened even more. "There's only $2,000 here, Audrey." "Well, I had to use some for household expenses, but I always intended to replace it before giving it to your mom." It was at that moment I realized this wasn't just about money, it was about respect, trust, family love. Audrey had taken the money my son sent me with such care and spent it on herself while I ate thanks to church charity. "Household expenses?" Wesley practically roared. "Audrey, that money was for my mother. My mother has been living in poverty while you spent her money on your clothes and your whims." "Wesley, calm down. I can explain everything." But Wesley wasn't listening anymore. He had walked to the desk and opened a laptop. His fingers flew over the keyboard with controlled fury. "I'm going to check all our bank accounts, Audrey. I'm going to see exactly what my mother's money was spent on." At that moment, I saw how Audrey's face changed completely. The mask of the perfect wife fell away entirely, and what remained was something cold, calculating without remorse. "Do whatever you want, Wesley, but remember that I am your wife. Your mother won't be here forever, but I will." Those words pierced me like daggers. Not only had she stolen my money, but now she was threatening me, reminding my son that he would have to choose between us. And at that moment, as I watched my son paralyzed between his mother and his wife, I knew the worst was yet to come. Who would Wesley choose? The woman who had brought him into the world and raised him with love, or the manipulative wife who had so shamelessly deceived him? The days that followed that terrible morning were like living in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. Willis didn't speak to me for a full week. 7 endless days without hearing the voice of my only son, without knowing if we could ever repair what had been broken between us. I spent hours sitting in my rocking chair, looking at the photographs that adorned my living room. Wesley as a baby, with his chubby cheeks and toothless smile. Wesley on his first day of school, with his immaculate uniform and new backpack. Wesley graduating from college, with his cap and gown, pride shining in his eyes. How had we reached this point? How had a woman who had only known my son for 3 years managed to create such a deep rift between us? When he finally called me, his voice sounded tired, as if he had aged years in those few days. "Mom, we need to talk. I'm coming over." He arrived alone without Audrey, which gave me a small hope. Maybe he had made the right decision. Maybe he had seen the truth clearly. But when he entered my house, his expression told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't coming as my repentant son. He was coming as a man who had made a difficult decision. "Mom, sit down, please." His tone was formal, distant, as if I were a client in his office and not the woman who had carried him in her womb for 9 months. I sat in my favorite rocking chair, the one where I used to sing to him when he was little, where I had spent many nights when he had a fever, where I had listened to his problems when he was a teenager. Now it felt like I was sitting in the defendant's chair. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," began Wesley, avoiding looking directly into my eyes. "And I think there are things you need to understand." "Tell me, son." My voice came out smaller than I expected. "Audrey made a mistake. Yes, but she has been under a lot of pressure lately. Her job at the boutique hasn't been going well, and she thought she was doing the right thing by saving the money." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Saving money while I ate beans from charity? "Wesley, son, she spent the money on clothes, on jewelry. She wasn't saving it for me." "Mom, I understand you're upset, But Audrey is my wife. She's the mother of my future children. I can't just abandon her over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That word hurt me more than any insult. My son was calling a misunderstanding the fact that his wife had stolen from me and had left me living in poverty for 8 months. Wesley, it's not a misunderstanding, it's theft, it's lies, it's betrayal. Mom, enough. His voice had hardened. Audrey has explained everything to me. She was scared to tell you she had the money because she thought you would be angry if you hadn't asked for it directly. She didn't know how to handle the situation. And that's why she bought new dresses. That's why she changed her car. Wesley sighed deeply, as if I were a capricious child who didn't understand adult matters. Mom, some of those purchases were necessary for her work. She has to look professional, and the car, well, her old car broke down. Every word that came out of my son's mouth destroyed me a little more. I could see that Audrey had worked on him, had planted doubts about my version of events, had found an explanation for each of her lies. And what about the missing money, Wesley? We only found $2,000 of the $9,600 you sent me. Audrey explained to me that she had some medical expenses she hadn't told me about, female issues, but she's going to replace everything gradually. I remained silent for a moment, processing what I had just heard. My son had chosen to believe his wife's lies over his mother's word. He had decided it was easier to think I was exaggerating or confused than to accept that he had married a thief. Wesley, I finally said, do you seriously think I would be lying about this? Do you think I would make up a story like this? For the first time in the conversation, he looked me directly in the eyes, and what I saw there wrung my heart. I saw doubt. I saw my son wondering if his 65-year-old mother was losing her mind, if she was inventing stories out of spite or jealousy toward his daughter-in-law. Mom, I don't think you're lying, but I think maybe things aren't exactly as you remember them. Those words were like a slap. My own son doubted my sanity, my memory, my honesty. Audrey had managed to plant the seed of doubt, and that seed had grown into a tree that now separated us. Fine, Wesley. I got up from the rocking chair, suddenly feeling very old, very tired. If that's what you think of your mother, then there's nothing more to say. Mom, don't be like that. I'm just trying to be fair to everyone. Fair? The laugh that came from my throat sounded bitter, hollow. Is it fair to let your wife steal the money you send me while I eat thanks to charity? Is it fair to doubt your mother's word? Wesley stood up too, but he didn't come near me. He stayed on the other side of the room, as if there were an invisible wall between us. Mom, Audrey has agreed to return the money to you gradually. We're going to establish a different system for transfers. Everything is going to be fine. No, Wesley, it's not going to be fine. I walked to the window, looking at the garden where he had played as a child. Your wife stole from me and humiliated me, and you are choosing to protect her instead of defending your mother. It's not like that, Mom. I'm not choosing anyone. I turned to look at him one last time. Yes, son. Yes. You are choosing, and your choice is very clear. Wesley stood still for a moment, as if he were waiting for me to say something more, to give him permission to leave with a clear conscience, but I had nothing more to give him. I love you, Mom. I will always love you, but Audrey is my wife, and I have to protect my marriage. And I am your mother, Wesley, but it seems that doesn't mean anything anymore. He left without kissing my cheek, without hugging me, without looking back. I watched him walk away through the window, get into his expensive car, and disappear around the corner. At that moment, I knew I had lost something more than money. I had lost my son. How could I move forward now that the only person left in my world had turned his back on me? How could I face the pain of knowing that a stranger's lies weighed more than 65 years of unconditional love? And most importantly, what would Audrey do now that she had won this battle? Because something told me this was just the beginning of a much larger, much darker plan. The following days were the darkest of my life. Wesley didn't call me, didn't visit me, didn't answer my messages. It was as if I had died to him, as if the 65 years of unconditional love I had given him had been erased from his memory. But the worst came when I started hearing the comments. Mrs. Jenkins, my neighbor across the street, told me she had seen Audrey at the supermarket, complaining to her friends about problematic mothers-in-law who make up stories to get attention. Hayes, who had helped me so many times with my electric bills, said he had heard rumors that I was losing my memory and that was why there were problems in the family. Audrey had started a silent but effective campaign to destroy my reputation. She didn't attack me directly, but she planted doubts about my mental stability, about my version of events, about my ability to remember things correctly. And the most painful thing of all was knowing that Wesley was probably hearing those same stories at home, that every night Audrey reminded him how confused his mother was, how difficult it was to deal with me, how much better it would be for everyone if we kept our distance. One afternoon, as I was sweeping the patio, I saw a car stop in front of my house. For a moment, my heart leaped thinking it was Wesley coming to apologize, but when Audrey got out alone, all hope vanished. She was wearing new clothes again, carrying bags from expensive stores. She approached my door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Evelyn. Can we talk?" I let her in more out of curiosity than courtesy. I wanted to hear what new lie she had come to tell me. "I came to bring you this," she said, taking an envelope from her bag. $500. It's part of the money I owe you." I took the envelope, feeling the thickness of the bills inside. It was real money, but somehow it felt ditty in my hands. "I also wanted to apologize to you," she continued, sitting in my living room as if she owned the place. "I know I made mistakes, but I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you. Your intention was to steal from me." "Don't call it stealing, Evelyn. It was a misunderstanding, a bad decision. But Wesley and I have talked, and we're going to make things right from now on." I sat across from her, studying her face. There was no real remorse there. There was no genuine guilt. There was only calculation, strategy, the satisfaction of someone who knows they have won. "What do you really want, Audrey?" Her smile grew wider, colder. "I want us to have a good relationship, Evelyn, for Wesley's sake. He's very stressed about this whole conflict, and I just want us to be a happy family." "A happy family? How can there be a happy family when it's built on lies?" "They're not lies, Evelyn. They're different perspectives of the same events, and I think it would be better for everyone if we left the past in the past." At that moment, I fully understood what was happening. Audrey hadn't come to apologize or make peace. She had had to establish the rules of the game. She was telling me she had won, that Wesley was on her side, and that my only option was to accept her version of events if I wanted to maintain any kind of relationship with my son. "And if I don't accept leaving the past in the past?" Her smile vanished for a second, and in her eyes I saw a flash of something dangerous. Well, Evelyn, that would be your decision, but Wesley is very loyal to the people he loves, and right now, the person he loves most in the world is me. She stood up, smoothed her expensive skirt, and walked to the door. Think about it, Evelyn. Do you really want to lose your son over pride? When she left, I sat in my living room holding the envelope with the $500. It was a small fraction of what she had stolen from me, but it was also something more. It was the price she was offering for my silence, for my dignity, for accepting to live in a world where her lies were worth more than a mother's truth. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I realized that maybe I had already lost my son forever. 3 months passed like an eternity. 3 months without hearing Wesley's voice, without a message, without a call, without even a word through third parties. It was as if my son had decided I no longer existed, as if the 65 years of unconditional love I had poured over him had completely evaporated. The $500 that Audrey had given me ran out quickly. I spent it on blood pressure medication. It had started to rise since this whole problem began, and on some urgent home repairs. The roof had begun to leak during the spring rains, and Mr. Hayes, my neighbor, had helped me fix it, but I had to pay for the materials. I went back to depending completely on the church food pantry. Every Tuesday and Friday, I walked the 6 blocks to Pastor Daniel's church. I lined up with other elderly ladies and needy families and received my bag with rice, beans, oil, and some cans. Sister Grace always greeted me with a genuine smile, but I could see the growing concern in her eyes. "Evelyn, are you sure there's no way your family can help you more?" she asked me one Tuesday afternoon as she checked the list of beneficiaries for the food pantry program. I didn't know what to answer. How do you explain to a church volunteer that your only son has abandoned you because he prefers to believe his thieving wife's lies? How do you tell her that you've lost not only money, but also the love and respect of the only family you had? It's complicated, Sister Grace. My family is going through a difficult time. She nodded with understanding but didn't press further. She was a wise woman who had seen many sad stories in her years of work with the community. The greatest humiliation came on a Thursday afternoon. I had gone to the market with the few dollars I had, trying to stretch the money to buy some chicken to complement the beans from the food pantry. I was at Miss Simmons' butcher shop, where I had been shopping for years, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Evelyn." I turned and saw Betty Carson, a woman I had known from Wesley's birthday parties when he was a child. She was the mother of one of his elementary school friends, and although we didn't see each other frequently, we had always maintained a cordial relationship. "Betty, how nice to see you," I said, trying to sound natural as Mr. Simmons wrapped my small purchase of 7 ounces of chicken. "Oh, Evelyn, I'm so glad to run into you. I recently bumped into your daughter-in-law, Audrey, at the new shopping mall." My stomach immediately tensed. "Oh, really?" Yes, she was shopping at those expensive stores. She was carrying bags from boutiques I wouldn't even dream of entering. She looked beautiful, very elegant. Betty smiled, but there was something in her eyes that made me nervous. We chatted for a while, and she told me that Wesley spoils her a lot, that he gives her everything she wants. "How nice," I murmured, paying Mr. Simmons my But she also told me something that worried me a lot, Evelyn. Betty's voice had become more serious, more intimate. She told me that you have been, well, a bit confused lately, that sometimes you forget things or make up situations that didn't happen. I felt as if someone had emptied a bucket of ice water over me. What exactly did she say? "Oh, Evelyn, I don't want to get involved in family problems, but she said that sometimes you accuse people of things they didn't do, that Wesley is very worried about your mental state, that they're considering taking you to a specialist doctor." Betty's words felt like stabs. Audrey had not only stolen from me and convinced my son I was crazy, but now she was spreading that lie throughout the neighborhood, destroying my reputation with people who had known me for years. "Betty," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "do you really believe I would make up stories?" She looked at me with an expression that was half pity, half discomfort. "Oh, Evelyn, I've known you for many years, and you've always been a very grounded woman. But age sometimes does strange things to all of us. My own mother, in her last years, sometimes said things that didn't make sense. I am not senile, Betty." "Of course not, dear, but maybe it would be good for you to talk to some doctor, wouldn't it? Just so the family can rest easy." I left the market feeling as if I were carrying an enormous weight on my chest. Not only had I lost my son and been robbed by my daughter-in-law, but now everyone in the neighborhood thought I was losing my mind. That night, sitting in my rocking chair, looking at the photos of Wesley that I had in the living room, I realized how completely alone I was. I had no living siblings. My parents had died years ago, and the few cousins I had lived in other states. Wesley had been my only real family, my only purpose, my only reason to keep going after his father died, and now I had nothing. The days turned into a mechanical routine of survival. I would get up, do the housework, watch a little television, cook with what little I had, and go to bed early to save on electricity. The weekends were the worst, because before they were when Wesley visited me, when my house was filled with laughter and life. One Saturday morning, I was watering the plants in the garden when I saw a familiar car parking in front of my house. My heart raced because I thought it was Wesley, but when the door opened, Audrey got out. But this time she wasn't alone. With her stepped out an older woman I didn't know, very well dressed, with expensive glasses and an air of authority that immediately put me on alert. Audrey approached the door with her fake smile as always, but the woman accompanying her looked at me with an evaluative expression as if I were a laboratory specimen. "Hello, Evelyn. I'd like you to meet Dr. Patricia Wells. She's a specialist in memory problems in older adults." I felt as if the ground had moved beneath my feet. "A doctor?" "Yes," intervened Dr. Wells with a professional but condescending voice. "Your daughter-in-law has told me about some concerning episodes you've had lately. Confusion, memory loss, unfounded accusations toward family members." "I haven't had any episodes of confusion," I said, feeling the anger growing in my chest. "Mrs. Harrington," the doctor consulted a notebook she was carrying. "According to what your family tells me, you've been accusing your daughter-in-law of stealing money that never existed, of making up visits that did occur, of creating family conflicts based on imaginary situations."
"That's not true."
"Audrey did steal the money my son was sending me." The doctor and Audrey exchanged a look that made me feel like a capricious child having a tantrum. "Mrs. Harrington," continued the doctor, "denial is very common in these cases. Patients with early cognitive deterioration frequently—" "I don't have cognitive deterioration," I shouted, completely losing control. "Audrey is a thief and a liar, and she has convinced my son that I'm crazy." "Evelyn, please calm down," said Audrey in a soft voice, acting as if she were the victim of an uncontrolled elderly lady. "Look how you're getting. This is why we're worried about you." The doctor quickly took notes in her notebook. Aggressiveness, paranoia, persistent accusations toward family members. Yes, we definitely need to do some tests. I don't need any tests. I need my son to stop believing this woman's lies. Mrs. Harrington, the doctor closed her notebook and looked at me with an expression of false compassion. I understand this is difficult for you, but your family just wants to help you. There are medications that can help with these symptoms. Get out of my house, I screamed, no longer able to contain the tears of frustration and rage. Both of you get out right now. Audrey and the doctor left, but before getting into the car, I heard the doctor tell Audrey, there are definitely clear signs of deterioration. I'm going to draft a report so you can initiate the legal guardianship process if necessary. Those words froze my blood. Guardianship. They wanted to declare me mentally incapable so Wesley and Audrey could completely control my life. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked around the whole house looking at every corner, every object that had witnessed the life I had built for 65 years, my house, where I had raised Wesley, where I had cared for my husband until the day of his death, where I had lived every important moment of my life, and now they wanted to take it all away based on the lies of a woman who had stolen from me and manipulated my son to abandon me. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something stronger than sadness and desperation. I felt a cold, calculating anger growing in my chest like a fire that had been sleeping for too long. I wasn't going to let them declare me crazy. I wasn't going to let Audrey win completely, and I definitely wasn't going to let them take away my house and my dignity without a fight. But to fight, I needed weapons. And for the first time in months, I started thinking like a woman who had survived 65 years in this world, not like a helpless victim. I had no idea that soon life would give me exactly what I needed to prove the truth and get my son back from the clutches of that ruthless woman. The call came on a Tuesday morning as I was preparing my chamomile tea. The phone rang with that insistence that indicates something important is about to happen. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something inside me told me to answer. Mrs. Evelyn Harrington? The voice was of a young man, professional. Yes, this is me. My name is Greg Sullivan. I'm an accountant. I work for your son Wesley at his company. Could I come to see you this afternoon? It's very important. My heart started beating faster. Is everything okay with Wesley? Your son is fine, ma'am, but I need to talk to you about some irregularities I've found in the accounts. That afternoon, Mr. Sullivan arrived at my house with a thick folder full of documents. He was a man in his early 40s with a serious face and glasses that gave him a very formal air, but when he looked at me, I saw compassion in his eyes. Mrs. Harrington, what I'm going to show you might be very painful, but I believe you have the right to know. He sat in my living room and opened the folder on the coffee table. Inside were account statements, copies of transfers, and reports that I didn't fully understand, but that clearly showed movements of money. As your son's accountant, I have access to all the company accounts and the personal ones he manages through us. A few weeks ago, Wesley asked me to review the transfers he's been sending you. He asked you to do that? Yes, I think he was starting to have doubts about what his wife had told him. Mr. Sullivan pointed to a series of numbers on the paper. These are the transfers from the last 8 months. $9,600 in total sent to an account in the name of Audrey Mitchell Harrington. I already knew that. Yes, but what you didn't know is what happened afterward. He turned to another page. Look at these movements. Every time the money arrived in your daughter-in-law's account, she immediately transferred it to another personal account she has at a different bank. My breathing became more agitated. Another account. A secret account that her son didn't know about. And look at what that money was spent on. He showed me a long list of purchases: designer clothes, jewelry, beauty treatments, trips, even payments for an apartment she was renting downtown. An apartment? Why would Audrey want an apartment? Mr. Sullivan looked at me with a very serious expression. Mrs. Harrington, I believe your daughter-in-law is planning to divorce your son. The apartment is in her name. She's been accumulating personal assets, and she's been moving money to accounts that Wesley can't touch. I felt as if the world had stopped. Does Wesley know this? Not yet. I just finished the investigation last night. But there's more. He pulled out another series of documents. I also found that she's been using your son's corporate credit card for personal expenses. In total, she's diverted almost $25,000 in the last 2 years. It's $25,000, an amount I couldn't even imagine while I had been eating beans from charity and asking for help to pay for electricity. Mr. Sullivan, are you going to show this to Wesley? Yes, ma'am. In fact, I have an appointment with him tomorrow morning, but I wanted to talk to you first because I think you're going to need support when all this comes to light. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed thinking about everything Mr. Sullivan had shown me. It wasn't just that Audrey had stolen from me. She had been stealing from Wesley too, planning to abandon him after financially bleeding him dry. And the worst part was knowing that my son had been defending a woman who was betraying him in the most cruel way possible. The next day, around noon, I heard a car stopping in front of my house with a sudden screech. I looked out the window and saw Wesley getting out of his car with his face completely distraught. He was running toward my door, and I knew he had already spoken with Mr. Sullivan. When I opened the door, my son looked as if he had aged 10 years in one night. His eyes were red, his clothes wrinkled, and he was holding the same folder that the accountant had shown me the day before. "Mom," his voice cracked. "Forgive me, please, forgive me." He collapsed into my arms like when he was a child and had nightmares. He cried on my shoulder for several minutes while I stroked his hair, just as I had done thousands of times during his childhood. "Mom, you were right about everything. Audrey is not the woman I thought she was." I led him to the living room and served him a glass of water. He looked devastated, completely broken. "Mr. Sullivan showed me everything this morning. The account statements, the transfers, the secret apartment, the credit cards, everything." He ran his hands over his face. "Mom, she's been stealing from me for years. Not just from you, from me too. Where is she now?" "I don't know. When I got home this morning after the meeting with Greg, she was already gone. She took all her things, emptied the safe, and left this." He showed me a handwritten letter. The handwriting was elegant, neat, but the words were like poison. "Wesley, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Our marriage has been a mistake from the beginning. You never gave me what I deserved. You always put your mother above me. I'm leaving with someone who does know how to value me. Don't try to find me. I've already talked to a lawyer and I'm going to file for divorce." "Audrey, with someone else?" I asked, though deep down I already suspected the answer. "Yes, Mom. It seems she's been seeing another man for months. The apartment she rented wasn't just for her." Wesley broke down again. "Mom, I was an idiot. I defended her when you were telling me the truth. I doubted my own mother for a woman who was lying to me about everything. I hugged him, feeling how he trembled in my arms. Wesley, son, she manipulated you. That's what people like her do. But I should have known better. You're my mother. You've known me since before I was born. How could I doubt you? Because she was very good at what she did, son, and because you wanted to believe you had found true love. We stayed embraced for a long time. For the first time in months, I felt like I had my son back, not the man who had been defending a liar, but the boy I had raised with love and values. Mom, I'm going to fix everything. I'm going to return all the money she stole from you with interest. I'm going to pay for any medical expenses you need. I'm going to— Wesley, I interrupted him gently. Money is not the most important thing. Then what is?
The most important thing is that you learn from this, that you never again doubt the people who truly love you, just because someone else tells you pretty lies.
He nodded, wiping away his tears. Can you forgive me, Mom? I already forgave you the moment you knocked on my door, son. But as I hugged him, I knew that although I had gotten Wesley back, the scars from these months wouldn't easily fade. I had lost trust in my son. I had lived in poverty while my daughter-in-law spent my money on luxuries. I had been humiliated in the neighborhood and had almost been declared mentally incompetent. The forgiveness was real, but I also needed Wesley to understand that things couldn't go back to exactly how they were before. This experience had changed us both, and the new relationship we would build would have to be different. Wesley, I finally said, there's something else we need to talk about. What is it, Mom? The doctor Audrey brought here, the report she made saying I was losing my mind. Wesley's face darkened. Mom, that was Audrey's idea. She convinced me you were having memory problems, that you needed medical help. And you believed it was necessary to bring a doctor without consulting me?
Wesley lowered his head in shame.
Yes, Mom, and I deeply regret it. Good, because that doctor made an official report, and that report could have been used to take away my house, my independence, my dignity. Mom, I would never have allowed. Wesley, you already allowed Audrey to control this situation for months. What guarantees me you wouldn't have allowed them to take my house too? We looked at each other in silence for a moment. It was a difficult question, but a necessary one. Wesley needed to fully understand the damage that had been done, not just by the stolen money, but by the betrayal of his trust. You're right, Mom. I have no right to ask you to trust me automatically after what happened. No, son, you don't, but you do have the opportunity to earn that trust again. He nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? First, I want you to go to that doctor and demand she retract her report. I want it to be officially clear that there's nothing wrong with my mind. Done. Second, I want you to recover every penny Audrey stole. Not just what was meant for me, but everything she stole from you too. I'm already working on that with Mr. Sullivan. And third, I said, looking him directly in the eyes, I want you to understand that our relationship is going to be different from now on. I love you, Wesley, but I'm no longer going to accept being treated as a burden or as someone who can be easily doubted. I understand, Mom, truly, and I promise I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you that I deserve your forgiveness. I looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, looking for signs of genuine sincerity. What I saw there was a broken man who had finally learned a very hard lesson about the value of true family. All right, Wesley, let's try. But as we hugged again, I knew that although Audrey was gone, the consequences of her lies and manipulations would be with us for a long time. The difference was that now we would face them together, as mother and son, and not as enemies separated by a stranger's lies. 6 months after Audrey disappeared from our lives, reality had settled like dust after a storm. Wesley had kept his promises. He recovered all the stolen money, had Dr. Wells officially withdraw her report, and divorced Audrey without fighting for any material possessions. She had taken what she could and disappeared with her lover, leaving behind only debts and lies. But the most important changes weren't about money or legal documents. They were about us. Wesley now visited me every Sunday, as he had done for years before marrying Audrey. But these visits were different. He no longer came as the successful son condescending to see his poor mother. He came as a humble man who had learned the value of true family in the most painful way possible. "Mom," he said one Sunday, as we ate the stew I had prepared for him, "I've been thinking about something." "Tell me, son, would you like to come live with me? The house feels very empty, and I think it would do me good to have you close." The proposal took me by surprise. Wesley's house was beautiful, large, full of amenities I had never had, but after everything that had happened, the idea of depending on him again, even with the best intentions, made me uncomfortable. "Wesley, I appreciate the offer, but I'm fine here in my house." "But Mom, you could have your own room, your own bathroom. You wouldn't have to worry about expenses anymore." "Son," I interrupted him gently, "it's not about the amenities, it's about my independence." I saw the confusion in his eyes. For him, after what had happened, it seemed natural that I would want the security of being close to him, of being cared for and protected. "I don't understand, Mom." "Wesley, during the months Audrey stole from me and you abandoned me, I learned something very important. I learned that I can survive alone. I learned that I don't need anyone to take care of me to have dignity. But I want to take care of you, Mom. I want to make up for everything I put you through. And I appreciate that very much, son. But the way to make it up to me is not by making me depend on you again. The way to make it up to me is by respecting my ability to make my own decisions." Wesley remained silent for a moment, processing my words. He had matured a lot in these months, but he still found it hard to understand that I had changed too. "Then what do you want, Mom?" "I want us to be family, but as equals, I want you to visit me because you enjoy my company, not because you feel obligated. I want you to respect my decisions, even when you don't understand them. And I want you to never again doubt my word just because someone else tells you something different." "I understand," he nodded slowly. "I think I do. You want love, not pity, respect, not charity." "Exactly." We established new rules for our relationship. Wesley gave me a reasonable monthly amount for my expenses, but in my own bank account under my total control. He visited me every Sunday, but if I ever didn't want visits, he would respect that. And most importantly, he had promised that he would never again allow a third person to interfere in our mother-son relationship. The true test of these new boundaries came 3 months later when Wesley began dating a new woman. Her name was Michelle. She was a marketing executive, divorced with no children. She was a simple, hard-working woman, very different from Audrey, but when Wesley introduced her to me, I saw something in her eyes that put me on alert. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Harrington," Michelle said to me with a smile that didn't completely convince me. "Wesley has told me so much about you. I hope good things. I replied, observing her carefully. During the following weeks, I began to notice small details. Michelle always found excuses for Wesley not to visit me on Sundays. We have plans, or my family organized a gathering, and gradually Wesley's visits became less frequent. One Sunday, when Wesley hadn't come in 3 weeks, I decided to do something I had never done before. I called him. "Son, can we talk?" "Of course, Mom. Is something wrong?" "Yes, something's wrong. I haven't seen you in 3 weeks." There was an uncomfortable pause. "Mom, it's just that Michelle has had a lot of family activities, and she wants me to participate." "Wesley," I interrupted him, "do you remember the conversation we had about not allowing third parties to interfere in our relationship?" Another pause. "Yes, Mom." "Good, because that's exactly what's happening again." "No, Mom, it's not the same. Michelle isn't like Audrey." "Maybe not, son, but the patterns are very similar. She's gradually pulling you away from me, and you're allowing it." "Mom, she just wants me to meet her family, to integrate." "And what about your family, Wesley? What about me?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Michelle hadn't explicitly forbidden visits to his mother-in-law, but she had done something more subtle and more effective. She had filled all of Wesley's free time with activities that didn't include me. "Mom, I don't want to fight with you about this." "We're not fighting, son. We're having an honest conversation. And the conversation is this: if you want to have a relationship with me, you're going to have to make space for that relationship. If Michelle can't understand that, then maybe she's not the right woman for you." "Mom, that's not fair. Michelle is a good woman." "Maybe she is, but a good woman for you should be someone who respects your relationship with your mother, not someone who tries to replace it or minimize it." I hung up the phone feeling strangely calm. I had said what I needed to say. I had clearly established my boundaries. Now Wesley had to decide what was more important to him. 2 weeks passed without news from Wesley. 2 weeks in which I wondered if I had been too harsh, if I had lost my son again for being too demanding. But on the 3rd Sunday, I heard the doorbell at 3 in the afternoon. When I opened the door, I found Wesley standing there alone. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, son." "And Michelle?" "Michelle and I broke up." I let him in without asking questions. I prepared coffee, and we sat in the living room as we had done hundreds of times before. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Wesley sighed deeply. I explained to her that I needed to maintain my relationship with you, that Sundays were our time. She said she understood, but then she started making comments about how I was a mama's boy, about how I needed to become independent from you. "And what did you tell her?" I told her that my mother had been there for me my entire life, that she had sacrificed everything to give me a good education and a good future. I explained to her that respecting you and maintaining a relationship with you wasn't being a mama's boy, but being a good son. I felt a warmth growing in my chest. And what did she say? She said I had to choose between having a serious relationship with her or continuing to be dependent on my mother. Wesley looked me directly in the eyes. "So I chose." "Do you regret it?" "No, Mom. I learned my lesson with Audrey. I'm not going to let anyone else make me choose between love and loyalty. The right person for me will understand that you are part of my life, and that is non-negotiable." We remained silent for a moment, enjoying the coffee and the peace we had finally found. "Mom," Wesley finally said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you know you had to be so firm with me? How did you know you shouldn't allow anyone else to interfere?" I thought about his question for a moment, because during the months we were separated, I learned something very important, son. I learned that it's better to be alone and have dignity than to be accompanied and be disrespected. Aren't you afraid of being alone? No, Wesley, because now I know the difference between being alone and being abandoned. Being alone is a choice you make to protect your peace. Being abandoned is something others do to you when they don't value what you have to offer. Wesley nodded slowly. I think I learned that difference too. I hope so, son, because the next woman who enters your life will have to understand that respecting me is part of respecting you. We continued talking until night fell. Wesley helped me wash the dishes as he had done when he was young, and before leaving he hugged me with the same intensity as when he was a child. I love you, Mom, and I promise that I will never again allow anyone to make me doubt that. I love you too, son. When he left, I stayed in my rocking chair, looking at the photos I had in the living room. Photos of Wesley as a child, photos of my husband, photos of a life built with love and sacrifice. I had lost money. I had lost time. I had lost innocence about what people are capable of doing for money, but I had gained something more valuable. I had gained self-respect, clear boundaries, and a relationship with my son based on mutual respect instead of obligation or guilt. Audrey had thought that destroying my relationship with Wesley would give her control over him and access to his money. But in the end, her betrayal had strengthened the bond between my son and me in a way that would never have been possible without that trial by fire. Now, when I wake up each morning, I don't do it as a victim of circumstances. I rise as a woman who survived, who fought, and who won. Not through revenge, but through silent dignity and unbreakable boundary. And that, I thought as I turned off the lights and prepared to sleep, was the best revenge of all. Living well with self-respect and with my son's love restored on terms that I had established. The war was over, and I had won, not just by getting my son back, but by discovering a strength in myself that I never knew I had.